Hello and welcome to another episode of the djproject Criterion Collection. And here we're going to talk about Spine 238. A Woman is a Woman, directed by Jean-Luc Godard in 1961. Alright, I'm just going to get this out of the way very quickly. This is another out-of-print title. Damnation. And this one is a real shame that it is, because this is probably the most playful you're ever going to get out of Godard. And yes, I know that's a relative statement. So the basic synopsis, as it were, and yes, actually this is an example of Godard using more or less a plot. Band of Outsiders would be another example of this, but the plot, as it were, is a woman named Angela, who's played by Anna Karina, Anna Karina, not to be mistaken with another one. She wants to have a baby, and at first she asks her current lover, Emile, played by Jean-Claude Brillet, and he steadfastly refuses. He does, for all kinds of reasons, but he doesn't want to. And saddened by this, she then goes to Emile's friend, Alfred, played by Jean-Paul Belmondo, and he reluctantly, basically what happens is that she goes to Alfred, and he refuses, but after a while he accepts, and so he sleeps with her, and Angela tells Emile about this, and then they suddenly decide on this idea that, well, maybe if you give it a chance, maybe you will be the father, and so that's how the whole thing kind of resolves. Sorry to spoil it, but again, as this is an out-of-print title, it's and as of this day, I don't think it's readily available in any form. I don't know if Lionsgate issued it yet for Blu-ray, so I'm sure it's going to be down on the pipeline, but I really don't know when that's going to come in. So my apologies for the for the spoils, but really this is not so much for the plot. It's more for other things. And as I said, this is the most playful that Godard gets, and by playful I mean the basis of all of this is from romantic comedies and comedy musicals, the kind that you find in the 1930s and 40s and even into the 50s. And this is all done by Godard, which means pretty much anything and everything goes. If he's going to screw around with some little aspect of the convention, he will do it. He particularly likes playing around with the music soundtrack, where the music would come in at seemingly random points, and sometimes the music will completely drop out from the soundtrack, and there are these exchanges that are always punctuated by some kind of musical punctuation, a little orchestra hit or a musical display of being emphatic. And that's just one example. I've also, in revisiting this, because it's actually been a while since I saw it, but in revisiting it, I have to explain this a little bit. I had this joke, and by joke I mean more something to entertain myself. In regards to my music collection, there are a few songs I know where I describe them as this is how I hear a particular genre. It's as if you were to, in other words, the song I'm thinking of is Mr. Bungle's "Everyone I Went to High School With Is Dead." And when I first heard that song, there were elements of it that reminded me of nu metal, and when I heard this, I'm thinking, this is kind of how my brain processes new metal. So if I hear a new metal song and somehow my head analyzes it and then reconstructs it in its own way to entertain itself, and then spits it back out, the result would be everyone I went to high school with is dead by Mr. Bungle. This film is probably how I see romantic comedies and comedy musicals. If you were to sit me down in front of a film like that, and then it would, my brain will do its own little twisted thing, and then spits it back out. It will come out with something like "A Woman Is a Woman." And now you think that is an insult, and actually, to me, I say that for the good romantic comedies, it makes it just as enjoyable. But it also kind of makes the bad ones slightly more tolerable. I'll probably still get enraged by it, but at least I can try to find something to entertain myself with it. So really, that's kind of it. There's a lot of, I'm trying to think of like other examples of like the playful elements. Like there are moments where the dialogue, there's lots of winks to the camera, and there's literal winks, but there's also ones that are more done in the actions and in the dialogue, and it's all done to kind of point out the artifice of of cinema. In fact, the thing this is probably why I like Godard a lot, is that Godard expressed, there are two quotes attributed to him, that when you take them together, they explained the paradox of cinema in its form, or in its form. He was famous for saying cinema is truth 24 frames a second, or truth photographed 24 times a second. And then the other statement is every edit is a lie. So on the one hand, you have a art form that is pretty close to capturing a real play. I mean, since it's built on photographs, and photographs are a reproduction of an image of light captured through emulsion. And so if I were to take a picture of this room, it will look pretty much exactly like if you were to actually be in the room with me. So that's an element of truth. But also and ever since this was practiced, by joining images together, by joining sequences of images together, you can join images that really have nothing to do with each other. I mean, you can film me all of these reviews are basically vlogs, so they're just one shot, me talking in front of a camera. But if I were to suddenly and I'm not going to do this, if I were to take the camera and go somewhere completely different, it's just me in another location. But maybe that's sort of a bad example, but the point is that I can make myself do something that I may not actually be doing. And so there's the element of lie. And to take it even further, you have this seemingly uneasy balance between authenticity and contrivance. Art is, in one respect, art should be a reflection of the real, whatever that means. Whether it's reproducing a sensory experience, whether it's emulating something that's there, it has some basis in reality, in some kind of reality. Whether you believe it's a material reality, whether it's a reality that is beyond our senses, call it the world of ideas, call it the will, whatever you want. But it is also an artifice. It is constructed. Think Rene Marguerite. This is not a pipe. So there is an artifice. It's artificial. It's constructed. It's not painting a picture, painting a bird does not instantly make it a bird. And I think the best art is the ones that, that tries to balance the two. And this is actually what makes A Woman is a Woman pretty interesting, because on the one hand, the underlying basis of it is a musical comedy, or a musical romantic comedy. And if you really look at the story of most romantic comedies, or romantic music, that ilk, it's very contrived. If you've ever noted, if you've ever said the word plot convenience or story conveniences, or you have to say this because the plot says so. If you've ever found yourself saying that, then you notice the artifice of it. But there are moments where those contrived moments are played. Well, sometimes they're played out in an artificial way to the extreme. Talking to the camera. There's one of the signature moments in the film is Angela and Emile they refuse to speak to each other in the night. And so the only way that they communicate with each other is they grab whatever books they have and they cover it in such a way as to showcase, in other words, to express what they're feeling. So Emile grabs a book and the title has executioner in it, so he covers it up so you see the word executioner. So yeah, that's a contrivance done to the extreme, and really making the point that this is all artificial. But then there are other moments, and I would say the plea that Angela makes to Alfred, they're in a small little cafe, actually it's probably more like a bistro. It's where they're at, but it's a scene that's played out. It feels a little bit more real the way the dialogue plays out. There's some, it doesn't quite get to the point. There's a little bit of hesitancy. There's some roundabout stuff, and it feels more like a genuine conversation. Which, going back to what I said with Contempt, Contempt taught me never to take seriously the 5-minute breakup, because more often than not, breakups do not last that long. They're much longer than 5 minutes, and they're never on point. It always spirals around an emotional core, and it just takes you to all kinds of weird places. But it all revolves around this emotional core that may or may not be made explicit during the whole thing, but it's ever present. It's the elephant in the room, as it were. So, and actually, I think Godard said himself, he called this a neorealist musical, which is amusing because it's not really a musical. I mean, there's music in it, but it's not like they totally break out into song, and actually the attempts of it's a little bit more genuine. There's no polish to it. But it's also far from neorealism because of the artifice. But again, it is and it isn't. It is a neorealist musical, and at the same time, it's not. And I'm sure Godard would love that little paradox as well. This film in his filmography, this is the second feature film that Godard made, and this is also the first one he shot in color and in CinemaScope. And it established a rule that he followed. Certainly in the 60s, it's disputed whether it should be followed for his subsequent films, starting from the 1970s, after Weekend onwards. And that is, anytime he shoots in black and white, it uses the full frame aspect ratio, 1.33 to 1. When he shoots in color, it's in some widescreen ratio. Most of the color films he made in the 1960s were shot in CinemaScope, therefore 2.35 to 1. In fact, actually, this is another example of this sort of paradox between something that's a little bit more genuine and also something that's very contrived. When you think CinemaScope, you think you think vista shots, you think, big people on screen, and it's all myth and grand, but the subject matter is a domestic affair, and done in this very, very contrived way. In fact, there are moments where the shots, they look like it's in very soft focus, and I think it's an attribute of what they were able to, what the way that it was lit, and the kind of film stock they had, and I think it's safe to assume that it was shot in 35. But because, actually, this is something I also noticed in Contempt too. Even though even though both films were shot in CinemaScope, the look of it feels more like feels slightly more like a 16 millimeter. You notice some grain, and in Woman is a Woman, there are a few shots where it looks like the focus is softer, a little blurred, and I think it's an attribute to the low light, but actually I think that's kind of interesting, where it's an epic looking documentary. It's an epic looking Jean Roche film, sorry. And there's a certain charm to that. But anyways, so yeah, like I said, unfortunately this isn't out of print, because I would say definitely go for it, especially if you've ever hesitated about seeing anything with Godard, and you're thinking, oh, this is all cerebral, and yes, there are cerebral things in it, and it's one of those things where the more you know about cinema, especially cinema at that time, the more jokes you'll get. For instance, there's a moment where Alfred meets someone, and it's played by Jeanne Moreau, who was in Elevator to the Gallows, and later on in Jules and Jim. In fact, one of the things he asks is, how's Jules and Jim coming along? And she responds, moderetto, which is both kind of a comment to the production, because it was in production at the time. It would be released a year later. And finally, it also makes a reference to a film that both of them were in, where part of the title includes moderetto. So it's little things like that, and on the one hand, I'm kind of sorry that there will be some things that may go over your head. I'm not sure if I get all of the stuff that's on there, just so I'm not claiming to be any kind of grand expert in picking out all the references you find in Godard, but I like the fact that they're there, and that's what makes it a little bit interesting. And I like the playfulness of it. And the reason, and also, I think this will be my last thought. The reason why I call this the most playful is that, and actually what I really mean by the most playful is that it's the least cynical. There is some moments of cynicism. The thing that you can that is often criticized about Godard is that his films tend to be very dour, and has a very low view of people, and I mean, when you make a film that's called Contempt, I mean, it kind of shows where your mindset is. But this is where it's, I mean, and this is where it feels a little bit more happy. But again, that's why I say that it's all relative, since this is Godard, and this is the first time that Anna Karina appears in one of his films, and they were married for a spell, and she was a muse figure to Godard at that time, and I think that their relationship, both personally and creatively, served as a kind of microcosm to what was happening at that time, and this is what makes Godard interesting to look at. Certainly, in terms of the history of cinema, and both the larger cinema and also specifically French cinema. Whether you like his films or not, or whether you find him frustrating or interesting, he is worthy to look at. So yeah, it's sad that this is not readily available. because it is definitely, if you're on the fence about Godard, if you've never experienced Godard, I would say that this is probably this is a good first film to see, because you'll get, once you see that, you'll kind of get an idea of what Godard was about, and then you can venture into other films. But since that's out of the picture, I would probably recommend Band of Outsiders as a good sort of warm-up to Godard. Obviously, I really like Contempts, but again, that's also out of print. And yes, you can get that right now on Blu-ray through Lionsgate. And I think I've said this before, but it's worth mentioning it again. To me, a lot of the times, it's when I make recommendations, particularly with titles that are out of print on the Criterion label, I would say just watch it, because in the end, it should be the title. And there are... Now, if you want to go out of your way to get it, there is a way to do it, but just be prepared to pay a hefty amount to get it, because buying it new and sealed is going to obviously drive up the price, but if you want a lower price, be prepared for it to be slightly used and slightly beat up and such. So, but the bottom line is that just go out and see the title, and if and I'll leave it up to you whether you want to actually try to get it or not. So yeah, it's definitely worth viewing. If you could try to view it, then please do so. So, a woman is a woman, and until next time, take care.